He brought the woman he loved home to meet his family, but they had already chosen another bride for him. Hi, my beautiful family, my loyal ones, my greatest treasures. Today I lift up a powerful prayer for every woman watching, for your strength, your grace, and the quiet battles only you carry. May you be covered, may you be seen, and may you be loved the way you deserve. You have my greatest love, deep, faithful, and without end. Stay with me until the very last word, because what I have for you today, I saved for the end. Let's start the story together. The cake had 2 names on it, and neither of them was hers. Aletha Sturgis stood at the edge of the Vandermeer garden with a gift bag in her hands and read the piped white letters twice, slowly, the way she read cracked glass before deciding whether it could be saved. Lowell and Meredith. The bag held a bottle of bourbon for Harmon Vandermeer because Lowell had told her it was his father's birthday and because Aletha's grandmother had raised her never to walk into anybody's house with empty hands. The bourbon was more than she should have spent. She had chosen it anyway, standing in the shop on the plaza for 20 minutes, wanting the old man to open it and understand that the woman his son loved had taste and manners and nothing to apologize for. The cake sat on its own table under the oak tree. 3 tiers, white on white, sugared magnolias down one side. A birthday cake does not have 3 tiers. A birthday cake does not have 2 names. Lowell, she said quietly. He was beside her, one hand at the small of her back, still smiling at something the valet had said, still believing what he had believed the whole drive over. She watched the smile go. She watched him read the cake the way people read telegrams in old films. Twice, because the first time the words refused to mean anything. No, he said, not to her, to the cake. Around them, the garden was full. 60 people, maybe more, on a lawn so green it looked painted, holding glasses of something cold and gold in the last light. Women in linen. Men whose watches cost more than the truck Aletha had parked on the street because the valet stand had made her feel like a delivery. A quartet near the boxwoods played something soft with strings in it. Every bit of it had been arranged, and none of it had been arranged for a birthday. Aletha had grown up east of Troost Avenue, in a narrow house on Wabash, where her grandmother still kept plastic on the good chairs. She knew what Troost meant in Kansas City. Everybody knew. It was the line the city had drawn 100 years ago and pretended it hadn't, the street where the loans stopped, and the schools changed, and the maps went quiet. She had crossed it her whole life to work, to study, to restore the windows of churches whose congregations had been rich for 4 generations. She had never once crossed it and forgotten which side she was standing on. She was standing on the wrong side of it now, in a garden in Mission Hills, holding bourbon for a man who had known she was coming. On the drive over, Lowell had held her hand at every red light on Ward Parkway and told her his father was going to love her. She had watched the houses grow larger and the sidewalks empty out, and she had said nothing, because some things you only know in your body, and her body had known since the plaza. Because that was the part she understood before Lowell did. She watched it arrive in him in pieces, but she had taken it whole, in one look at that cake. His mother had known Lowell was bringing her tonight. Lenore Vandermeer had set the engagement announcement of her son on the exact evening her son was bringing home the woman he actually loved, and she had done it so that Aletha would be standing on this lawn when it happened. You could hate a thing like that. Later, she would. Right now, she mostly recognized it, the way you recognize weather. Some people threw plates, some people raised their voices. Lenore Vandermeer sent calligraphy. There's been a mistake, Lowell said. His voice had gone thin. Aletha, I swear to you, this is my father's birthday. I saw the invitation. You saw an invitation, she said. I don't think you read it. A waiter drifted past with a tray of champagne. He offered it to Lowell. He did not offer it to Aletha, and she noted that too, filed it away without expression. One more pane in a window she was beginning to see whole. 4 years. That was what she had walked in with. 4 years of Lowell Vandermeer showing up at her workshop in the West Bottoms with coffee and staying until midnight watching her solder lead came, asking questions no man had ever asked her about glass. 4 years of him learning her grandmother's shrimp and rice, of Sunday drives out past Luce Park, where he'd point at houses and tell her which ones he'd have designed differently. He was an architect who had left his family's money to draw buildings for people who had none, or that was the story. And she had believed the story, and most of it was even true. But in 4 years, she had met his parents twice, both times in restaurants, both times brief. She had told herself that families like this one move slowly, that he was protecting her from them until it could not be avoided, and she had let herself be told, because she loved him, and love does bookkeeping in its own favor. Tonight was supposed to be the door opening. He had asked her 3 weeks ago, nervous as a boy. Come to the house. Meet them properly. It's Dad's birthday. It'll be easy. There'll be so many people they'll have to behave. There were so many people, they were behaving beautifully. Lowell. A voice like cool water over stone. You made it. Lenore Vandermeer did not cross a lawn. She arrived at the far end of one and let it bring her to you. She was 70 and slim as a blade of iris, silver hair pinned low, pearls the color of weather. She kissed her son's cheek without touching him, and then turned the whole calm architecture of her face toward Aletha. And you must be the friend Lowell brought, she said. How lovely. We always say the more the merrier, don't we? Though tonight of all nights I confess I've lost count. The friend. 2 words, placed like stones. Aletha Sturgis, Aletha said, and put out her hand, because her grandmother had also raised her to make people refuse her manners out loud if they were going to refuse them. Lenore took the hand for exactly as long as courtesy required. Her eyes went to the gift bag. Oh, you needn't have. Gifts are being collected at the side table. One of the staff can show you. They came in through the service entrance. They'll know the way. There it was. Not a slur, not a raised voice. Just a sentence with a door in it, and the door led to the kitchen. Mother, Lowell said, what is this? What is that cake? That cake, said Lenore, is Swiss meringue, and it cost more than your first car, and you will not raise your voice near it. She smiled at a passing couple, a smile that opened and shut like a fan. Your father wants you by the fountain in 10 minutes. Wear a better face than this one. I'm not engaged to anyone. Darling. She said it gently, and the gentleness was the worst thing in the garden. The Vanes are here. Judge Alderton is here. Half the membership of the club is standing on my grass. Whatever you think you came here to do tonight, you are too late to do it, because everything that matters has already been done. Her gaze touched Aletha once more, light as a fingerprint on glass. Enjoy the evening, Miss Sturgis. The bar is fully open, to everyone. She moved on. The lawn carried her away. Lowell turned, and Aletha watched him look for the exits, all of them, the human ones. He was pale under his summer color. We're leaving, he said. Right now. I'll fix this. I'll call my father tomorrow. I'll... Look at the fountain, Aletha said. By the fountain, under strings of small lights just now coming on against the dusk, stood a young woman in pale blue, dark blonde, slender, pretty in the way of oil portraits, holding a glass she wasn't drinking from. She was surrounded by people and completely alone, and Aletha, who had spent her working life reading light through colored glass, read her in one pass. The woman was not glowing. The woman was enduring. Meredith, the other name on the cake. And as Aletha watched, Meredith Vane lifted her left hand to tuck back a strand of hair, and the ring on it caught the party lights and threw them, and something in Aletha's chest tipped over slowly, like a ladder starting to go, though from this distance she could not yet see why. She only knew the way you know weather. A fork rang against crystal. The quartet let its song die. At the head of the garden, Harmon Vandermeer rose from his chair with a glass in his hand and 70 years of ownership in his shoulders, and the whole lawn turned toward him like a field turning toward sun. "Friends," he said, and his voice needed no microphone. It had been giving orders across rooms since Eisenhower. "Lenore and I thank you for coming. They tell a man my age to stop having birthdays, so tonight we are celebrating something better than a birthday." His eyes found Lowell across the grass, found him, held him, dared him. "Tonight," said Harmon Vandermeer, raising his glass, "we celebrate my son." Beside her, Aletha felt Lowell stop breathing. "And the future," the old man said, "of this family." Chapter 2, The Ring. To Lowell, Harmon Vandermeer said, "and to Meredith Vane, who this autumn will do this family the honor of becoming a Vandermeer." The applause came up off the lawn like starlings all at once from everywhere. Glasses caught the string lights. Somebody near the boxwoods called out a bravo. The quartet slid into something bright without being asked, because they had been told what was coming and when, which meant the musicians had known before the groom. Aletha did not look at the old man. She looked at Lowell. He had gone very still, the way buildings are still. She saw his jaw work. She saw him take one breath to shout with, and she saw the shout die somewhere between his chest and his mouth, killed not by cowardice, but by arithmetic. 60 guests, a judge. His father's heart, famously unreliable, famously invoked. Every path out of this moment ran through a scandal his family would survive and Aletha would wear. "No," he said. He said it at the volume of a man alone in a car. The crowd was already moving, and the crowd decided what his no meant, which was nothing. Hands found his shoulders. Someone pressed a fresh glass into his fingers. The lawn itself seemed to tilt gently, sociably, delivering him downhill toward the fountain, toward the lights, toward the woman in pale blue, and Aletha stood alone by the gift table and watched Kansas City's oldest clockwork do what it was built to do, which was move a man where his name needed him to be. She could have shouted. The thought arrived, and she examined it honestly. She could raise her voice on this grass and say 4 years, say the words courthouse and mine, and watch 60 faces turn. And every one of those faces would remember forever, not what Lenore Vandermeer had engineered, but what the woman from east of Troost had done at a garden party. Her grandmother had a saying for it. "Don't hand them the story they already wrote about you." So she set the bourbon on the gift table, squared the bag so the tissue stood up nicely, and walked toward the fountain instead. Toward, not away. If the evening was going to cost her everything, she would at least see what it had been spent on. Meredith Vane was being congratulated the way furniture is polished. Women held her arm and spoke past her. Men toasted in her direction while looking at Harmon. Up close, she was younger than the dress made her look, and her smile had the particular endurance of something practiced in a mirror against its will. "Congratulations," Aletha said. Meredith turned, and here was a strange thing, a thing Aletha would take home and turn over for days. The women had never met, and yet what crossed Meredith Vane's face was not confusion and not triumph. It was recognition. She knew exactly who Aletha was, and behind the recognition, quick as a fish, went something that looked almost like apology. "Thank you," Meredith said. Her voice was low and careful. "That's kind. That's a beautiful ring." Meredith's hand moved, an inch, an instinct, as if to hide it, and stopped, because hiding it was not permitted. She held it out instead, obedient as a schoolgirl. Aletha had heard about this ring before she ever saw it. 2 winters ago, on the front steps of the Wabash house, under the blanket Ceola kept on the porch rail for exactly that purpose, Lowell had told her about his grandmother Vandermeer. The only one of them, he'd said, who ever touched anybody on purpose. A farm girl from Excelsior Springs who married up and never let the house eat her. She had died when Lowell was 19, and he had described her funeral to Aletha in detail, the whole family arranged in the front pews like place settings, and how he had been the only one who cried, and how his mother had passed him a handkerchief with a look that meant, "Put that away." Her ring was a pale sapphire in old mine-cut diamonds, worn thin at the band from 60 years of dishwater. She refused to let the help do alone, and Lowell had said, with his eyes somewhere out over the dark street, that it was the one object in that whole mansion that had ever been given in love. And then he had looked at Aletha in a way that finished the sentence. The sapphire threw its pale light up at her now from another woman's hand. There are wounds that bleed and wounds that inform. This one informed. Lenore had not merely arranged a marriage. She had gone into the family vault and chosen from everything in it the single object her son had attached his heart to, and she had spent it publicly where he could not object. It was not even cruelty toward Aletha, or not only. It was a lesson addressed to Lowell, written in stone and set on a hand. Nothing in this family is yours, not even love, especially not love. It was his grandmother's, Meredith said quietly, and Aletha understood that Meredith knew that too, knew all of it, and hated the ring with her whole obedient heart. "I know," Aletha said. "Wear it carefully. It's older than it looks." Across the fountain, Lenore Vandermeer was watching them both with the mild attention of a woman checking that a table had been set correctly. Aletha left through the front, not the service entrance. She walked the length of the lawn at an unhurried pace, spine straight, past linen and pearls, and the crowd parted for her the way crowds part for anyone who moves, as if they have somewhere better to be. At the gate, she heard her name, once, cracked in half, Lowell's voice. And she heard the other sounds too, the ones that mattered. His father's low command, the rustle of the party closing around him like water over a stone. He did not reach the gate. She counted later, though she was not proud of it. It was 11 minutes before her phone rang. 11 minutes is a negotiation. 11 minutes is a man being talked to. She let it ring. Her truck was where she'd left it, on the street beyond the hedges, and she drove out of Mission Hills with the windows down, because the air in that garden was still on her skin, and she wanted Missouri to take it back. Ward Parkway unspooled its fountains and its medians. The houses stood back from the road behind their lawns, like people who had been assured they would never be touched. Then truced. There was no sign. There never had been. Just a traffic light like any other, and on the far side of it, the street lights spaced further apart, the storefronts barred, the great old churches standing in the dark with plywood in their side windows, waiting for somebody like her. She crossed the line her city pretended not to have, and she felt what she always felt, which was not shame and was not anger, but a kind of terrible fluency. She could read both sides. That was her whole life. That was, she understood tonight, exactly why Lenore Vandermeer had let her walk onto that lawn before destroying her, so she would be able to read precisely what was being said. The phone rang the whole way home. It rang while she parked. It went quiet while she sat in the dark cab with her hands on the wheel, and in the quiet she finally let one breath shake on its way out, one only. And then it started ringing again. The porch light was on at the Wabash house. Cleola Sturgis sat in its yellow circle in her housecoat, 81 years old, sipping something from a jelly jar, waiting up the way she had waited up for 50 years of other people's disasters. "Well," Cleola said, reading her granddaughter's face by porch light at 40 feet. "Sit down, baby. Party ran long?" "Party ran exactly on time," Aletha said. "It just wasn't mine." She got as far as the second step. She sat. She put her head against the rail post. and her grandmother's hand came down on her hair, dry and warm as August, and neither of them said anything for a while, because the Sturgis women did not spend words on what hands could carry. "He know?" Ceola asked finally. "Before?" "I don't know." "You will," said Ceola. "One way or the other, that always comes out. Only question is whether it comes out of him or gets pulled out." She took a slow sip from the jelly jar. "What'd you leave behind you over there?" "A bottle of good bourbon and every illusion I had left." "Bourbon's a loss," her grandmother said. "Rest of it travels light." Aletha laughed, one broken syllable of it, and wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and it was in that exact moment, her guard down for the first time in 5 hours, that headlights swung onto Wabash Avenue. They came slow, reading house numbers. Not Lowell's low-grey car, something longer, darker, quieter, the kind of car that gets driven for other people, and it slid to the curb in front of the Sturgis house and sat there idling with its lights on, illuminating the two women on the porch like a stage. The rear door opened. "Lord," said Ceola softly, setting down her jelly jar. "They didn't even wait for morning." Chapter 3. The Envelope. The rear door opened, and Lenore Vandermeer stepped out onto Wabash Avenue in the same grey silk she had worn to ruin the evening, and stood a moment looking at the Sturgis house, the way appraisers look at estates they expect to acquire. The driver stayed with the car. The engine stayed running. Everything about the arrangement said this would be brief. Miss Sturgis. She came up the walk unhurried, heels precise on the buckled concrete. "Forgive the hour. I find difficult conversations go better without an audience, and my house has had rather a lot of audience tonight." Her eyes moved to Ceola and performed politeness. "Ma'am?" "Uh-huh," said Ceola, and did not get up, and did not offer the second chair. Aletha stayed where she was on the step. Below her, that was where Lenore now stood, and Aletha let her stand there, because on the Vandermeer lawn, the ground had done Lenore's talking, and on Wabash Avenue, the ground answered to somebody else. "You have 5 minutes," Aletha said. "You're burning one on the ma'ams." Something flickered at the corner of Lenore's mouth that in another woman might have grown up to be a smile. She opened the small clasp bag on her wrist and drew out an envelope, cream, heavy, engraved, and held it out. Aletha didn't take it. Lenore laid it on the step between them, like a card player showing out. "Those went into the mail 3 weeks ago Tuesday," Lenore said. 140 of them. The engagement of Lowell Harmon Vandermeer to Miss Meredith Elise Vane. There is one sitting in my son's apartment in Westport at this moment. You may verify the postmark whenever you wish." She straightened. "I tell you this for one reason, Miss Sturgis. Whatever performance of shock my son gave you on my lawn this evening, he has had that envelope in his home for 20 days. I did not hide this wedding from him. Men like Lowell do not need things hidden from them. They hide things from themselves, and then they find some warm and decent person to be astonished with." The porch light hummed. Down the block a dog complained once and thought better of it. "That's what you drove across Troost at midnight to tell me," Aletha said. "That your son's a liar." "I drove across at midnight to tell you the shape of things, because you struck me this evening as a woman who prefers the truth even when it's aimed at her." Lenore's gaze was level, and this was the strange part, entirely without heat. "This engagement is a year old. It concerns 4 families, a great deal of history, and matters that were in motion before Lowell ever wandered into whatever workshop it is you keep. It will not be moved by sentiment. It cannot be. I don't expect you to understand the machinery, but I promise you the machinery is real, and it does not lose to love, Miss Sturgis. It has never once lost to love." "You'd know," said Ceola from her chair, mild as morning. Lenore turned her head. The two old women looked at each other for a long moment across the yellow light, and something passed between them that Aletha could not read. some long telegraphy of women born in the same decade on opposite sides of the same line, and it was Lenore who looked away first, which Aletha noted and kept. "There is a second matter," Lenore said briskly now. "I'm told your work is exceptional. The diocese speaks of you. The preservation people speak of you." She let a small pause open. "The Vandermeer Trust funds restorations, Miss Sturgis. Sanctuary glass, mostly, some civic. There is a program that has needed a principal artisan for 2 years, at a scale of work you will otherwise wait your whole career to touch. I could put your name to it in a week. You would never again bid against anyone. That is not offered against your silence, you understand. It is offered against your absence." There it was, at last, gleaming in its wrapper. Not a payoff, nothing so crude, nothing you could photograph. A career, handed over like a coat. The trade named out loud in the politest possible grammar. Your life's work, for my son's life. Aletha looked at the envelope on the step. Then she picked it up, and Lenore's chin lifted slightly with something like satisfaction, and Aletha reached over and dropped it in the jelly jar, into the last inch of Siola's lemon water, and watched the fine engraving drink and darken. "Mom," Aletha said, "the day I take work from you, glass will lie." For a moment nobody moved. Then Lenore Vandermeer did the most frightening thing she had done all evening. She nodded once, almost approvingly, as if a measurement had come back exactly as estimated, and turned and walked back down the crooked walk to her idling car. She paused at the door. "He will choose you," she said, without turning around. "For a while. They always choose the girl at first. It's the years I've never lost, Miss Sturgis. Ask him about the envelope, then watch his face instead of listening to his mouth." The car took her away west, back across the line, and the street repaired its darkness behind her. "Baby," Siola said after a while, retrieving her ruined jar with dignity. "That woman came here to lose. She didn't lose anything. She came to see what you're made of before the fight starts," her grandmother said. "That's scouting. You don't scout what you've already beat." She rose, joints announcing themselves, and gathered her housecoat. "Now go inside and don't call that man tonight. Let him have the whole night to decide who he is. You'll want to know what he came up with all by himself." Aletha did not call. It cost her, but she did not. He came at 7 in the morning before her coffee, his grey car crooked at the curb, and his shirt the same one from the party, and he stood at the bottom of the porch steps unshaven and wrecked in the pale light. And the first thing he said was, not, "I'm sorry," and not, "I love you." He said, "I told them no. I stood in my father's study until 3 in the morning, and I told them no, and I'll keep telling them, and I need you to come with me right now, because there's something I have to open in front of you." "The envelope," Aletha said. His whole face stopped. "She came here. Drive," she said. His apartment in Westport looked like the life of a man who had stepped out of his own family, half beautiful and half bare, drafting table by the window, one good chair, books on the floor in ordered stacks. By the door sat a wooden bowl where his mail went to be ignored, and Aletha understood the bowl at one glance, because there were weeks of it, bank things, firm things, and near the bottom, cream and heavy, the corner of an engraved envelope. Lowell lifted the whole stack out and found it and held it, and she watched him read the front of it, his own name in copper plate, and go pale at what it might make him. "It's sealed," he said. "Aletha, I swear on my grandmother, I never opened it. I saw the envelope come in, I saw the crest, I assumed it was the birthday, I threw it in the bowl like I throw everything from that house. That's the truth. But I know how it looks, and I know my word is worth nothing this morning, so—" He held it out to her. "You open it." "No," she said. "You open it. I'll watch." Lenore's voice moved through her, unwelcome, accurate. Watch his face instead of listening to his mouth. His thumb went under the flap. The good paper tore slowly, expensively. He drew out the card, and Aletha watched his eyes go across the engraving, once, twice, and then watched something break open in his face that no man alive could counterfeit, though what broke was not what she had braced for. Not guilt, not relief. It was fear. He turned the card around and held it up, and she read it. "Mr. and Mrs. Harmon Vandermeer request the pleasure of your company at a dinner celebrating the birthday of Harmon Edward Vandermeer, a birthday card." His envelope, a loan of the 140, had a birthday card in it. "She printed one," Lowell said slowly, working it out as he spoke, arriving somewhere cold. "One single birthday invitation, and mailed it to me, so I'd come, and so I'd bring you, and so you'd be standing on that grass when Dad raised the glass." He set the card down as though it might go off. "Aletha, she wanted a witness. She built the whole night so the person who saw me fail to fight would be you." On the drafting table, his phone began to buzz and crawled itself in a slow circle, and the name on the screen said, "Dad." And outside, a Westport garbage truck took up its gospel, and neither of them moved. "Tonight," the message said, when it stopped ringing and the words came through instead. "The house, alone. We settle this like family." Lowell looked up from the screen, and for the first time since the cake, Aletha could not read him at all. Chapter 4. What the old man said at the window. She drove him there herself. That was her one condition. He said alone, Lowell had told her, and Aletha had picked up her keys and said, "You'll be alone. I'll be outside. Those are different words." And something in her voice had ended the discussion before it started. Now the truck sat on the street in Mission Hills with the engine ticking itself cool, and the Vandermeer house stood back behind its lawn with every window lit, and Lowell had been inside for 50 minutes. Aletha waited. She was good at waiting. Her whole trade was waiting. Hours with a heat gun and a blade easing century-old putty loose without cracking what it held. And she sat in the dark cab, treating the night like a window that could not be rushed. At 55 minutes, the front door opened, and it was the wrong man. Harmon Vandermeer came down his own front walk in shirt sleeves, no jacket, carrying 2 glasses of something brown, moving with the deliberate flat-footed roll of a big old man whose knees had filed their grievances years ago. He came around to her side of the truck and stood at the window, and up close he was bigger than he'd looked, commanding a lawn, with a grey face and a farmer's hands that 80 years of banking had never managed to soften. She rolled the window down. "Bourbon," he said, holding one glass through. "The bottle you left at my party. Seemed a waste to let that crowd drink it." She took it, because refusing it would have meant something and accepting it meant nothing, and he seemed to register the calculation and approve of it. "Where's Lowell?" Inside with his mother being told things. Harmon leaned a forearm on her door, like a man at a feed store. "Which is her department. I came out here because I wanted to look at you without her running the weather." He took a slow pull of his drink. "You know what I did before I did anything else? Cattle. Out of Excelsior Springs, my mother's people. Everything in that house behind me came out of livestock and land, whatever story the club tells. So I'm going to talk to you like the cattleman, not the banker, and you can hate me for it, but you won't be confused. Fair enough? Go ahead." "My boy is the 4th Vandermeer to carry this thing," Harmon said. "It is heavier than it looks and worth less than it costs, and I have known that for 60 years and carried it anyway, because my father asked me to, the same way his asked him. 40 years ago, when I could have lost all of it, one man stood behind my paper when no bank in this city would. Meredith Vane's grandfather. I gave that man my word that our houses would be joined. He is dead now, which makes the debt permanent. That is what this is. It was never about you, and it sure as hell was never about love. It's about whether my word dies before I do. Then marry her yourself, Aletha said. The old man barked one short laugh, entirely real, and looked at her with something that had woken up behind his eyes. There it is, he said. He told me you were like this. He set his glass on a side mirror carefully, and his voice dropped into a lower gear. Now here's why I came out. Not to threaten you. Lenore does the threatening, and she's better at it than I ever was. I came out to tell you the truth about my son one time from the man who raised him. Lowell has never been poor. Not for an afternoon. He has played poor, down there with his drafting table and his little apartment. But the net was always under him, and he always knew it. And a man who knows the net is under him is not brave. He is just unafraid, and those are different animals. His eyes came up and held hers, flat and grey. You have been poor. I looked into you. Wabash Avenue, grandmother on a church pension. Every dollar you ever held you cut out of solid rock. So you know what the third year of nothing does to a man who has never done a first year. You know it better than he does. And you're hoping I'll spare him, Aletha said. You're hoping I'll do your work for you and leave, and you get to keep your word, and your son, and everybody gets to say nobody chose. I'm hoping you're smart. I am smart, she said. That's why he gets to decide. Your whole family has spent his life deciding for him, and look what it built. A 40-year-old man who says no at the volume of a prayer. She handed the bourbon back through the window, untouched. Your word is your debt, Mr. Vandermeer. You don't get to pay it with my husband. She heard herself say the word. He heard it too. It was not true yet, not in any courthouse, and it hung between them in the dark, like something lit. The old man straightened up off her door, and what settled over his big grey face then was not rage and not contempt, but a kind of tiredness so old it had furniture in it. He'll break, Harmon said quietly. Not this year, maybe not next, but this family doesn't lose people, girl. It just waits for them to get tired of the door being open. He collected his glass off her mirror. Tell your grandmother, Harmon Vandermeer says she raised something. He was halfway up his own walk when the front door opened and Lowell came out of the house with a duffel bag. Father and son passed each other on the flagstones. Neither one stopped. Neither one spoke. 40 years ended in 4 seconds of Missouri quiet. And then Lowell was in her truck, breathing like a man who had swum a distance. And behind him the big door shut without a sound, which was somehow worse than a slam. Drive, he said. Please. She drove. Ward Parkway ran them east, fountain by fountain, and Lowell sat with the duffel on his knees and told it in pieces. His mother had done the talking after all. The firm's biggest accounts, gone by Friday, that would be arranged. His name off the trust by month's end. The wedding proceeding on schedule, with him, Orr and Lenore had said this without blinking, in a form the families would find acceptable. And when he had finally stood up and said Aletha's name, said it loud, said it the way he had failed to say it on the lawn, his mother had folded her hands and replied, Then take summer clothes. You'll want to be settled somewhere before it turns cold. That was the whole goodbye, Lowell said. Practical advice. He laughed, and the laugh cracked in the middle. 40 years, and she'd disowned me like she was cancelling a subscription. At the light at Troost, he took her hand off the gearshift and held it against his mouth and shut his eyes, and Aletha let the light turn green behind her and sit there, one full cycle, because some moments outrank traffic. I don't have anything now, he said against her fingers. You understand that? The apartment goes with the firm goes with the name. I've got a duffel bag and a drafting table and you. I've been rich on less, she said. He smiled at that, wet-eyed, and it was almost entirely the smile she loved. It was near midnight when they carried his bag up to the Wabash porch, where Teola had left the light burning and a plate in the oven because that woman knew things through walls. She came out in her housecoat and looked at Lowell a long minute, at the duffel, at the wreck of him, and then she pointed one finger at the door and said, "Chicken's dry by now. Eat it anyway, both of you. Nobody ever decided anything worth deciding on an empty stomach, and tomorrow's got decisions in it." It was the closest thing to a welcome the occasion could hold, and Lowell, to his credit, understood it, and ate every bite of the dried chicken like communion. And it was there on that porch, in the lamplight where his mother had stood a week before, that Aletha saw it. Lowell set down the duffel to find his phone, and dug through his pockets, and laid the contents on the porch rail. Wallet, keys to the grey car, and a single brass house key on its own worn ring, old, heavy, the kind of key made when locks were furniture. The key to the Mission Hills house. He saw her see it, and he picked it up, quick, too quick, and pushed it deep into the duffel's side pocket, down where things go to be forgotten on purpose, and said something easy about needing to return it eventually. And Aletha said nothing at all. But she had spent her life reading what light does at the edges of things, and she lay awake a long time that night, listening to the man she loved breathe in the dark of her girlhood room, thinking about doors, and about an old man's flat grey voice saying it just waits for them to get tired of the door being open, and about one brass key sleeping in a duffel bag 6 feet from her bed. Chapter 5. The rooms above the frame shop. Tandy Ruffin rented them the rooms above her frame shop in the Crossroads for what she called family price, and what was actually Charity wearing a receipt. 2 rooms and a kitchen the size of a confession booth, radiators that sang in the morning, and tall old windows over 18th Street where the light came in sideways and generous. Aletha loved it before the first box was unpacked. Lowell said he loved it, and worked at loving it, and she watched him work. They made it theirs the cheap and holy way. His drafting table went under the best window. Her sample panes went along the sills, saints' faces and fragments of border glass, so that on clear mornings the bedroom wall ran with colour like something spilled. Tandy sent up crooked frames she couldn't sell, and they hung photographs in them on purpose, crookedness, and all. On Sundays they crossed truce to Ciola's table, and Lowell learned to make the rice right, which took him 7 Sundays and 1 direct scolding, and the night he finally got it, Ciola looked at him a long moment over her fork and said, "Huh," which in Sturgis was a medal. Those were the good weeks, and the story should say so, because they were real. He woke early and made coffee wrong with total confidence. She came home smelling of flux and lead, and he called it her perfume without a shred of irony. On the hottest nights, they carried kitchen chairs onto the flat tar roof and ate supper above the streetlights, and he named the downtown buildings for her one by one, who drew them and what the drawings got wrong, and she gave him back the churches, which ones held German glass, and which held Bavarian, and which held plain panes and more Holy Ghost than the fancy ones ever managed. They were poor together in April in Kansas City, and there were whole days it felt less like hardship than like being let out of school. But Aletha kept her accounts, quietly, the way she'd been raised. And the account said this: her days had shape, and his were losing theirs. She left every morning for the workshop with commissions waiting. He sat at the beautiful drafting table, sending his portfolio to firms that had all, suddenly, just filled the position. Thanks so much, they'd keep his materials on file. Kansas City architecture was a small pond, and word had gone around the pond, the way it does, that the Vandermeer boy had been priced, and what touching him cost. He didn't tell her most of it. She learned it anyway from what he stopped saying. It was a Thursday in May when Meredith Vane walked into the frame shop downstairs. Aletha was at the counter helping Tandy wrestle a mat cutter when the bell went, and there she stood in the doorway in plain clothes, no pale blue, hair down, looking smaller than the fountain had made her, and younger than the ring did. She had the wide, careful eyes of a woman who had parked 3 blocks away and walked past the door twice. "I'm not here for him," Meredith said, before anything. "I need you to know that first. I'm not here about him at all." Tandy looked at Aletha. Aletha tipped her head at the back room, and Tandy took her mat cutter and her opinions and withdrew to exactly the other side of a thin door. They sat on work stools among the smell of sawdust and glue. Meredith held her purse on her lap with both hands like a passport. "You know what my engagement is," she said. "I watched you look at the ring. You worked it out standing there. I could see you doing it. So I'll just say the part you can't work out." She breathed. "My father owes them. Not owes like a mortgage. Owes like a man who bet the plaza on the plaza and lost. Grandview land, the club, our house, my mother's things, all of it is standing up because Vandermeer paper is under it. And the day Harmon calls that paper, the Vane family becomes a story people tell at parties. I am the payment plan. Nobody ever said it in those words. Nobody ever had to. My father cried when he asked me. He cried, and he still asked." The radiator down in the shop knocked twice and went quiet. "Why tell me?" Aletha said. "Because you won." Meredith looked at her, and there was no bitterness in it, which was the astonishing part. There was something closer to hunger. Lowell walked. Whatever it costs him, he walked. And nobody in my life has ever walked, and I wanted to sit in the same room as the reason. Her fingers worried the clasp of the purse. "And because you think it's over. I came to tell you it isn't. The wedding is still on the calendar. The florist is confirmed. The invitations were never recalled. Nothing has been cancelled, Aletha. They're not planning a different future. They're waiting for this one to fail." "Lenore said something like that. On my porch." "Lenore says it to frighten you." Meredith shook her head slowly, and for a moment she looked at the sample frames on the wall, the empty rectangles waiting for other people's pictures, and something moved across her face that Aletha would think about for weeks. "I had a fiancé once, before this, a teacher in Lawrence. Nobody ever forbade it. Nobody raised a voice. It just became quietly impossible, month by month, like water going down a drain, until one day it was gone and I couldn't point to the hand that did it. She came back from wherever she'd gone. I'm saying it because I've been inside there waiting my whole life. And I know what it feels like. It doesn't feel like pressure. That's what nobody understands. It feels like patience. It feels like a door nobody ever mentions, standing open in another room. They don't lose, Aletha. They wait. And the waiting is aimed at him, not you." She stood and settled the purse on her shoulder, and at the door she stopped with the bell already trembling. "He keeps the key," she said, not turning around. "Doesn't he?" Aletha didn't answer. The silence answered. "They always keep the key," Meredith said, and the bell rang her out into the afternoon. Aletha climbed the stairs slowly that evening and said nothing about the visit, and she told herself the withholding was mercy and knew by nightfall it was practice. June came in hot. The city put its shoulders into summer, and Lowell found some work at last, drafting handicap ramps and kitchen expansions for a housing non-profit out of a church basement on Prospect. Decent work, honest work, work he described at dinner in the bright, deliberate voice of a man narrating somebody else's life. She loved him for taking it. She saw what it took. Then, on the last Friday of the month, she came home early with peaches from the city market and heard his voice through the door at the top of the stairs. Not the words, the register. There is a voice a man uses on the phone with power, an octave of the old life, smooth and capable and slightly bent at the knee, and Lowell was using it, and it stopped her on the landing with her hand on the knob and the peaches going warm against her hip. She waited. She hated herself for waiting, and waited. Understood. No, I do. I understand the position. Friday then. Thank you for the call. And then, lower, after the hang-up to the empty room, 2 words. God. Okay. She counted 10 and went in. He was at the drafting table with the phone face down and a smile already built. "Hey, peaches?" He came and kissed her, took the bag, admired them singly and at length. "Good day. How's the church survey coming?" "Who called?" "One beat. Half of one. Insurance thing. Lowell said, turning to the sink. The old renter's policy from Westport. They keep chasing me about a cancellation date, paperwork ghosts. He ran water over the peaches, his back to her, his shoulders easy. I'll deal with it Friday. It was smooth. It was fluent. It was, and this was the part that reached in under her ribs and sat down, effortless, the lie coming off him with no seam and no shine, well made, professionally made. And Aletha stood in her own bright kitchen among her saints' faces and her sideways light, and understood that she was hearing a language he had grown up speaking, and had merely, until now, had no need of in this house. Watch his face instead of listening to his mouth. His face was fine, his face was lovely. Water beaded on the peaches, and he set them one by one on a towel with real tenderness, and whistled 2 bars of something, and outside the tall windows, the Friday traffic went home happy down 18th Street. She could have asked again. She stood inside the moment and saw both roads, the way she could always see the whole window before the first cut. Ask again and become his mother, checking, measuring, waiting for him to fail, or let it lie and trust the man who had walked down his father's flagstones with a duffel bag for her sake. She chose trust. She would come back to this kitchen 100 times in her mind later, and stand again on this square of pine floor and choose again, and she never once blamed the woman who chose it. But the story has to write it down plainly, because it mattered. That was the evening the silence moved in with them. It took up no room at all, at first. Chapter 6. Her Name in the Corner. The fire at Greater Vine Street, Baptist, had happened the winter Aletha was 9. She remembered it the way the whole East Side remembered it, a smoke you could taste on Wabash Avenue and a sound of women crying in the cold, and she remembered standing inside Shiola's coat watching the south windows go, 11 feet of Jordan River and ascending doves that some traveling German had leaded together in 1921, and no insurance man had ever valued at what they were. The congregation saved the building. The windows they boarded over, because grief that size gets plywood, and the plywood had stayed up for 27 years. Now there was money, a preservation grant, a founder's fund, 3 decades of fish fries. And on a bright morning in July, Aletha Sturgis stood in the fellowship hall in her good grey suit, with her portfolio open on a folding table, being examined by the deacon board of the church her grandmother had been baptized in, which was a room of 9 old faces that knew her whole family history and were determined not to let that count for anything. "Miss Sturgis," said Deacon Otha Pemble, who had run the inquiry like a man auditing scripture, "everybody at this table watched you grow up, which is exactly why we brought in bids from Chicago and St. Louis, so nobody could say we handed our windows to Wabash Avenue out of sentiment." He looked over his glasses. "Turns out we don't need sentiment. Yours came back best. On the merits, in writing, all 3 consultants." He shut the folder. "The board voted last night, 9-0. Bring our river back, baby." The baby broke the room. 9 grave faces went to church all at once, and somebody's fist hit the table in joy, and Miss Otterline from the kitchen came through the door with a pound cake she had baked on faith the night before. Aletha held it together until the parking lot, and then sat in her truck and cried the good kind for 6 entire minutes, hands at 10 and 2, going nowhere. The Jordan River window was the largest restoration ever awarded to an independent artisan east of Troost, and the papers would eventually say so, but that was not what her hands knew. Her hands knew that she had learned glass in the first place because of a boarded window she walked past on the way to school, wondering all through her childhood what was still alive back there in the dark. Some people get to marry their question. She drove straight to the workshop and started drawings that same afternoon and did not notice nightfall. Lowell took her out to celebrate, and here is what must be said for him, in a story that is going to be hard on him soon. His gladness was real. Whatever was eating him took no bite of her joy. He asked 100 questions, the right ones, about kiln schedules and lead poisoning protocols and the doves, and he was the one who teared up at the fish fry math, 3 decades of $2 plates hauling 11 feet of river home. That night, he held her in the sideways dark and said, "You know what you are. You're the only person I've ever met whose life adds up." And he meant it as pure praise, and she heard, faint underneath it, a man doing subtraction on himself. It was August when she asked him to marry her. She did it on a Tuesday, over red beans, with no ring and no speech, because that was the whole point. "Not their kind of wedding," she said. "No lawn, no cake with names on it, no 140 envelopes. Jackson County Courthouse, my grandmother, your terrible signature, done. Married like poor people, Lowell. Married like it's nobody's business but God's and Missouri's." He put down his fork. For 1 second, something crossed his face too fast to name, and then it was gone under a wave of the truest happiness she ever saw him wear, and he came around the little table and knelt on the kitchen floor entirely without irony and said yes into her hands. They were married on the last Friday in August in courtroom 2B annex of the Jackson County Courthouse downtown, 9 minutes total, by a judge who married 11 couples that day and still found them something warm to say. Ceola stood witness in her funeral and victory hat. Tandy stood the other side, crying frankly and photographing everything including her own thumb. Lowell wore his one remaining good jacket. Aletha wore yellow. There were 2 rings, plain bands from a jeweler on Minnesota Avenue, and inside hers, where nobody would ever see it, he'd had the man engrave 4 words, "The light comes sideways." She didn't find the engraving until that night, turning the band under the lamp, and when she read it, she had to sit down on the edge of the bed, because it meant he had been paying attention the whole time, to her windows, to her mornings, to the way she talked about glass when she thought he wasn't listening. Whatever else was true of Lowell Vandermeer, and there was going to be more truth than she wanted, the man had learned her by heart. Afterward, the 5 of them, counting the hat, ate barbecue at a metal table and toasted with sweet tea, and Ceola stood up unasked and delivered the only wedding speech, 11 seconds long. "Marriage is a house, live in every room." And that was the day, entire, and it lacked nothing, and forever afterward the smell of burnt ends would put tears somewhere behind Aletha's eyes. One thing happened that she filed and did not open. On the courthouse steps, in the sunshine, Tandy had raised her phone for the picture, and Lowell had glanced, quick as a bird, at the street, at the passing cars, the parked cars, the far corners. One sweep, half a second, a man confirming an absence, and then the smile for the camera, wide and real. A person who had not spent her life reading edges would have missed it. Married men look around like that, she told herself, when they've been rich. Old habit. Photographers used to matter. She filed it. 3 weeks into September, on a Sunday, the Kansas City Star ran its engagements page, and Ceola, who read the paper end to end the way her mother had, went quiet in her chair on the porch in a way that had a temperature to it. She handed the page across without a word. The photograph was a year old. Lowell in black tie beside Meredith in silver, some benefit at the Nelson Atkins. The text was 4 lines of engraved serenity. "Mr. and Mrs. Harmon Vandermeer of Mission Hills are pleased to announce the forthcoming marriage of their son, Lowell Harmon Vandermeer, to Miss Meredith Elise Vane. An October wedding is planned at the Church of the Ascension. An October wedding is planned, present tense, 3 weeks after courtroom 2B. Aletha sat on the step, where the envelope had once drowned in lemon water, and read the 4 lines maybe 30 times, and what she felt was not primarily rage, though rage attended. It was vertigo. Somewhere west of Troost, there existed an official version of the world, printed, dated, photographed, in which she had never happened, and the version in which she was a wife existed in exactly 1 ledger in 1 courthouse and in the mouths of 4 people and a judge. Both versions could not be true, but only one of them had been announced. "He has to answer this," Ceola said. Not angry. Old Testament level. "Today." He came home from the Prospect Avenue office at 6, and Aletha met him in the kitchen with the page flat on the table between them, and watched his face do the thing his face did now, the quarter second of construction before expression, and hated that she had learned to see it. "They're bluffing," Lowell said. "It's her, it's pageantry, it's pressure. They announce it so the club keeps believing it, and when October comes and I'm not standing there, it collapses on its own, and I never had to give them the fight they want. Aletha, engaging with it is losing to it. Silence is the only thing she can't use. Then announce us." She kept her voice level as a sill. "4 lines. The Star runs marriages too, I checked. Lowell Vandermeer married Aletha Sturgis on the 28th of August at the Jackson County Courthouse. Your mother can't use that either, and it has the advantage of being true." The pause was small. In a lesser kitchen, it would have passed unmeasured. "Soon," he said. "I want that. I do, just not as a reaction to her, not on her news cycle. Let the October thing die first, and then we announce it clean, on our own, when it can't be read as." He gestured at the paper, as answering this. It was reasonable. Every word of it was reasonable, and he came and held her, and she let him, and over his shoulder the last sideways light came through her saints and laid their colors out across the table, across the announcement, across the 4 grey lines where she didn't exist. Soon, she thought. There was a word doing a lot of lifting. October was 6 weeks away. The Church of the Ascension had already ordered its flowers. Chapter 7. St. Luke's Harmon Vandermeer's heart quit on him for the first time on a golf course in late September, on the 9th green, mid-sentence, arguing about drainage. Aletha learned of it the way she now learned everything about that family, second-hand and sideways, from Tandy, who heard it from a framer who did work for the club. By then, the old man had been at St. Luke's on the plaza for 2 days, and Lowell had said nothing at all. She watched him that evening across their small supper and gave him every opening a wife can set out. "How was your day? Anything happen? You seem far away." And Lowell, grey around the mouth, pushed rice he had learned to cook in her grandmother's kitchen around his plate and said, "Work was work, and the non-profit was fine, and he was just tired, and each answer was smooth, and each answer was a door closing softly somewhere down a hall." The message from Lenore had come that morning. Aletha would not learn its exact wording for weeks, but she would learn it, because words like those get repeated. "Your father is asking for you. Come today, come alone. This is family business, and whatever you have been doing across town, that woman is not family." He went. Of course he went, and she would never once fault the going. A dying father calls and a son answers. That arithmetic is older than mercy. What she fell against, what she kept falling against, was that he built a second life to hold the going. "Job sites," he said. A survey out in Blue Springs, a permit meeting that ran long. For 11 days in October, her husband dressed each morning, kissed her at the top of Tandy's stairs, and drove west into a country he told her he no longer belonged to, and came home each evening smelling faintly of hospital, that white smell that no cologne argues away, and she said nothing and hated her own silence and fed it anyway. The proof, when she finally stopped pretending she hadn't seen it, was small and total. A parking stub from the St. Luke's visitor garage, gone through the wash in his good trousers, dried into a stiff grey wafer that she peeled off the drum and held under the kitchen light for a long time. 11 punches. And in the drawer by the door, where 2 keys had lain side by side since August, hers to the workshop and his brass one to Mission Hills, there was now 1 key. The brass one was back on his ring. She checked while he slept. She despised herself in the act, and completed the act, standing in the dark hallway with his keys cold in her palm, and there it hung among the daily ones, gone home to the ring like it had never been exiled, and Aletha put the keys down exactly as she had found them, and went and sat in the front room until the windows went grey. Meredith's voice, months old, They always keep the key. She could have detonated it that morning. She built the sentences while he made his terrible coffee. Instead, she heard herself say something she had not planned at all. "I want to see him." Lowell went still at the counter. "See who?" "Your father. He's at St. Luke's. He's been at St. Luke's for 2 weeks, and you've been with him every day of it, and we can talk about the rest of that later, or never. I haven't decided. But he's dying, Lowell, and he and I have unfinished business from a truck window, and I'm going today. You can drive me, or I'll take myself." Every construction fell off his face at once, and what stood there was so naked, guilt and grief and animal relief at being caught, that she nearly crossed the kitchen to him. Nearly. "He asks about you," Lowell said, barely audible. "Every visit. She leaves the room and he asks what you're working on. Then he's going to hear it from me." The cardiac wing at St. Luke's was hushed and expensive, and the private room at the end held more machinery than man. Harmon Vandermeer had gone small in the bed the way big men do, all his acreage called in. But the flat grey eyes came around to the door, with their wattage intact, and when he saw who stood there, he made a sound in his ruined chest that was recognizably a laugh. "Ha! The cattleman's verdict," he rasped. "Sit down, girl. And you," to Lowell, "go find your mother and stand where she can see you. This one and I have a private account." They were alone with the machines. "Jordan River window," Harmon said. It was not a question. "Greater Vine Street. I read the trade bulletins. Dying's boring. 11 feet of 1921 German figural work, and they gave it to a lone hand east of Troost." The grey eyes measured her. "Good. Somebody in this town still awards on merit. It isn't anybody in my family." "You called me out here to review my work?" "I called nobody. You came. That's the whole difference between you and every person who's been through that door in 2 weeks." He shifted, and pain went across the big face and was dismissed, an unsatisfactory employee. "Now listen, because I don't repeat things anymore, I can't spare the air. My wife is drafting papers, deathbed papers, my signature and my son's, dressed up as a dying man's piece. Re-entry to everything I threatened him out of. She'll bring them to this room while I'm too far under to argue, and she'll tell my boy it's my last wish. And here is the thing about Lowell, girl, and you know it or you wouldn't sleep so bad. In a room with a dying father and a mother with a pen, he will sign. He signs. It's the fastest way out of any room, and he has spent his whole life looking for the fastest way out of rooms." The monitor kept its small green time. "Why, tell me," Aletha said. "You wanted me gone. You stood at my window and asked me to leave him." "I stood at your window and tested the fence," Harmon said. "Fence held. That changed my thinking." His hand moved on the blanket, a big spotted ruin of a hand, and to her lasting astonishment it turned palm up on the cotton, open, an offering or a surrender or both. "I've bought everyone I ever met. That's the trade I know. Can't buy you, can't scare you, so I'm left with the one tool I never learned, which is asking. When it comes, and it's coming soon, don't let the signature be the end of the story. That's all. Whatever my son does in that weak hour, you hold the fence 1 season longer and make him climb it. He's the only thing I ever built that might still come out worth the materials." She looked at the open hand a long moment. Then she put hers in it, and the old man gripped with what he had left, which was still considerable, and nodded once, business concluded, and closed his eyes. At the door his voice caught her one last time, down to a whisper with gravel in it. "Sturgis. The bourbon was good. You've got taste and a spine. And my grandson or granddaughter, whenever that happens, tell them their grandfather said so, since I won't get to." She made it to the elevator before her eyes spilled and rode down 12 floors crying for a man she had every right to hate, which is the kind of thing hearts do without filing for permission. She did not tell Lowell what his father had said about papers. She has to own that in this story too. She told herself she was protecting the old man's confidence, and under that, in the dark of her, lived the truer thing. She wanted to see what her husband would do in the weak hour, unwarned. Lenore tested, Harmon tested. She had courted off them like a fever. 12 days later, on the second Thursday of November, at 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, the phone lit the bedroom wall, and Lowell sat up out of sleep already knowing, the way sons know, and took the call with his bare feet on the cold floor and his back to her, and said, "Yes, yes, I'll come now," and put the phone down and did not turn around. "Lowell, my father died 20 minutes ago." His voice was a stranger's, formal, arranged. "I have to go to the house." He dressed in the dark. At the door he stopped, a shape against the hallway light, and for 3 full seconds she believed he was going to say it. All of it, the stub and the key and the papers and the whole architecture of his hiding, and the moment stood open like a window. "The funeral," he said instead, "is going to be complicated." Then the stairs took him, and the grey car woke in the street, and Aletha Sturgis lay alone in the dark above the frame shop, listening to her husband drive west, and understood that the weak hour had arrived, and that no one in the world was less ready for it than the man it was coming for. Chapter 8. The program. She dressed for the funeral the way she prepped for a difficult window, slowly, completely, leaving nothing to chance. The good black dress pressed twice. Her grandmother's jet earrings, older than the church they were going to. Lowell had been at the Mission Hills house for 4 days, arranging what he called arrangements, coming home past midnight and leaving at dawn, and he had said, on the phone, in a voice she barely recognized under its new formality, that it would mean everything to have her there. Those words exactly, it would mean everything. She should have heard it then. Have her there, not beside me. There. The Church of the Ascension stood in its old stone certainty off-Ward Parkway with the morning sun on it and half the money in Missouri filing up the steps. Aletha came alone, early, and an usher in grey gloves met her at the door with the guest book and the programs, and asked kindly whether she was with the Vane party or the club delegation, and when she gave her name, he ran his white finger down a list and down it again, and his face performed a small regret. She was welcome, of course, all mourners welcome. General seating open to the left. The program was heavy creamstock, and she read it standing in the doorway while the organ tuned its grief. Harmon Edward Vandermeer, the dates, the Psalms, and then, under family, the names in small engraved capitals, his wife Lenore, his son Lowell, his sister in Wichita, and on the 4th line, in the same type as blood, Miss Meredith Elise Vane. Aletha read the family of her husband 4 times. She was not on the page. There was no version of the page on which she had ever been anywhere near the page. She took a seat at the back, on the aisle, spine straight, program face down on her knee, and watched the front of that church assemble the official world. Lenore in black, upright as iron, and Lowell, her Lowell, seated in the first pew between his mother and Meredith Vane, in a black suit she had never seen, that fit him the way only the old life fit him, and from 40 rows back she watched the 3 of them receive the room, and understood that she was looking at a photograph that had already been captioned. Widow, son, daughter almost. Kansas City would go home from this funeral with the picture it came in with. He knew she was in the building. She watched him not turn around all service long, watched the discipline of it, the back of his neck rigid with the effort of not turning, and that was somehow the worst thing yet, that he had the strength for that, and not for 4 engraved words. Grief has manners, so she stayed through the Psalms for the old man, who had asked her with an open hand to hold a fence. She stayed for the eulogy delivered by a judge about handshakes and word-keeping, and she thought about hospital gravel saying, "Tell them their grandfather said so," and her eyes burned for the only Vandermeer who had ever put her name in the future tense. The receiving line afterward moved through the parish hall under enormous flowers. She should have skipped it. She stood in it. Some part of her, the part her grandmother called Sturgis iron, and her own tired heart called the last inch of hope, needed to walk up in front of witnesses and take her mother-in-law's hand, so that just once, today of all days, the two worlds would have to touch. Lenore Vandermeer took her hand, looked at her, in full, and in that face, Aletha watched something that no one could have staged, because the woman had buried a husband 4 hours before, and her craft was down around her ankles. Lenore did not recognize her. 1 beat, 2, a hostess frown, searching, and then gently, to a woman holding her hand at her husband's funeral. "Thank you so much for coming, dear. Are you with the caterers? The kitchen entrance is just through the back. They'll be glad of you." There was no cruelty in it. That was the wound entire. A year of war, a porch at midnight, an envelope drowned in lemon water, and the truth stood plain in a grieving old face. Aletha had never registered as an enemy, because an enemy is a person, and in the official world she had simply never become one. Lowell had erased her so thoroughly, so long, that his own mother, meeting her at close range for the 3rd time, saw only staff. "I'm nobody," Aletha heard herself say from a great distance. "I knew your husband a little. He had taste and a spine." Something flickered far back in Lenore's eyes, an echo trying to place itself. The line moved. It was over. She was almost to the doors when Meredith caught her. The girl came fast across the hall, black dress, no ring on her hand, and this Aletha registered dimly and would understand later, and Meredith took her by the wrist, actually took her, and drew her into the vestibule among the coat racks, and her face had come apart in a way that had nothing to do with the funeral. "You didn't know," Meredith said. "Oh, God, I've been watching your face for an hour and you don't know." "Know what?" "Thursday night at the hospital." The words came in pieces. Lenore brought papers to the room, re-entry to the estate, the trust, all of it, restored in full. She told him it was Harmon's dying wish, that his father couldn't go in peace with his only son cut out, and Harmon was under the morphine by then, he couldn't say otherwise, and I stood in the corner of that room, Aletha, and I watched your husband read them, and I watched him look at his father's face for a long time, and then I watched him sign. The coat racks stood in their rows. Somewhere in the hall, a caterer dropped a tray, and the whole world rang. "There's language in it," Meredith said, wretched, wringing it out. "I heard the lawyer read it. Continuity of family standing, his household in order to the satisfaction of the trust. It's her clause, it's how she writes, it means you, it's built to mean you." And he read it out loud in that room, and he signed under it. Her grip on Aletha's wrist tightened. "I swear I thought he'd told you. When I saw you standing in the back all alone, I thought she knows, and she came anyway, and I thought you were the strongest woman in Missouri. Aletha, I'm so sorry. I thought you knew." Aletha stood among the coats, and the strangest thing happened in her, which was arithmetic, very calm, very fast, the whole ledger at once. The stub in the wash, the key gone home to its ring. Job sites. Soon. It would mean everything to have her there. The back of his neck, rigid, all service long. A man does not fail to mention his marriage for 14 months by accident. He curates. He had kept her real in one world and deniable in the other, and Thursday night, in the weak hour his father had prophesied to her face, he had signed the deniable world back into force with his wife 12 blocks east, asleep in her yellow going-away dress of a life. "The ring's off your hand," Aletha said. Her voice came out level and far away. "I gave it back to him this morning." Meredith's chin came up with the last of her courage. "Whatever happens to my family now, I'm done being currency. You did that. Watching you did that." Her face broke again. "Please don't let this be what you take home." But it was. It was what there was to take. Lowell found her on the church steps in the noon light. He came out of the doors calling her name, program in his fist, and the black suit fit him. And behind him, in the shadow of the doorway, his mother watched. And Aletha stood 2 steps below her husband and asked him the only question left in the building. 14 months, Lowell, in any room, on any day, to any one of them. Did you ever once say the words, my wife? And her husband, who loved her, she never doubted it after either, that was never the part in question, stood in the November sun in front of God and Ward Parkway and looked for the fastest way out of the room. The pause was not long. It didn't need to be. She had spent 4 years learning to read him at the speed of light through glass. I was protecting you, he began, from... And she was already going down the steps. She went home. She packed the 1 bag she had arrived in this marriage with. She left his brass key where it lay and set her key to the rooms beside it in the drawer. 2 keys again, side by side, the way the whole thing had started. She kept the ring on. The marriage was true. That had never been the part in question. Then she cross-truced, going east in the falling dark, to the porch where the women of her family had always gone to hold what was left, and Ceola opened the door before she knocked. Chapter 9. Paper against paper. Winter came to Kansas City, and Aletha Sturgis went to work. That is not a figure of speech, and the story will not dress it as one. Grief with nowhere to live moves into the hands, and hers had 11 feet of Jordan River waiting. She was at the workshop by 6 each morning, while the streetlight still held, cutting and grinding and leading, rebuilding a drowned man's masterpiece 1 dove at a time, and the deacons took to leaving a thermos inside the side door without comment, and Miss Otterline's pound cakes appeared on a schedule known only to Miss Otterline. The East Side does not ask a grieving woman questions. It feeds her and stands where she can see it. She did not file anything. Tandy raged up and down the frame shop about lawyers, about that clause, about making him pay, and Aletha let her rage because it was love, and then said the thing she had settled on the first sleepless night at Ceola's. I'm not suing a man for hiding me. There's no court can order somebody to be proud of you. He knows where I am. Paper put us wrong. If he wants us right, it'll have to be paper again, and it'll have to be his. And if he never does it? Then I married a coward with beautiful handwriting, Aletha said, and I'll grieve that too, and the window will still be finished by Easter. He called. She didn't answer, and then he stopped calling, and the stopping frightened her more than the calling had, until the first envelope came. It arrived at Ceola's in December, hand-addressed. Inside was no letter, only a document, stamped and recorded at the Jackson County Recorder of Deeds, and Aletha read legal language at the kitchen table, with her grandmother's glasses on her nose, until the shape of it came clear. A renunciation, full, formal, irrevocable. Lowell Harmon Vandermeer, for consideration of $1, disclaiming all present and future interest in the estate of Harmon Edward Vandermeer and the Vandermeer Family Trust, all standing, all restoration, all of it, signed, notarized, filed. The signature from the hospital room, hunted down and killed in the open, in the public record, where his mother's claws had lived. No note, no plea, just the instrument itself, because he had finally understood the one thing about her that mattered. She was done listening to his mouth. Tandy brought the second proof on a Sunday in January, laid the newspaper on Ceola's table without a word, folded to the announcements. Married. On the 28th of August, at the Jackson County Courthouse, Lowell Harmon Vandermeer, son of the late Harmon E. Vandermeer and Lenore Vandermeer of Mission Hills, to Aletha June Sturgis, daughter of the late Robert Sturgis and granddaughter of Mrs. Ceola Sturgis of Kansas City, artisan in glass, to whom he has been, in every hour since, unequal and devoted. The true date. 5 months late and printed at last. with his mother's name set right beside the courthouse where all her friends would find it, and the whole city invited to do the arithmetic against October's cancelled flowers. Aletha read unequal and devoted 11 times. Ceola read it once, grunted and said, "Well, boy can write when he's out of other options." The third thing she saw with her own eyes, because Tandy made her go. The estate sale at the Ward Parkway house ran a full weekend in February, advertised in the Star, and this was Lenore's answer to the renunciation, swift and total. If her son wanted out of the family would liquidate the parts of it he had loved. Aletha stood across the street in the cold with her collar up, one stranger among the Gawkers, and watched dealers carry the old man's leather chairs and the hall clock down the flagstone walk. And on the Saturday afternoon, they brought out the drafting table. She knew it before the blanket came off. Lowell had described it 100 times. His grandfather's oaken iron, the one he'd learned at, standing on a crate at 7, while the old man set his hand on the pencil, the single object in that house he had ever asked his mother for. It went into a dealer's van for whatever it went for, and on the far corner, hatless in the cold, stood her husband, watching. He had known it would be sold. He had come anyway, to stand in the wind and pay attention while it happened. And he made no scene and no bid, because a bid was money, and money was theirs, and he had chosen, at last, and in the worst currency, to be poor. He never saw her. She watched Lowell Vandermeer watch his childhood carried down the walk, saw what it cost by what it did to the set of his shoulders, and then she watched him turn and walk east on cold feet like a man with nothing left to sign. And she sat in her truck for a while after, not crying, holding the wheel. The letter came in March, and it was the last thing, and it was only 1 page. Aletha, I'm not going to tell you I understand what I did, because I've stopped trusting the part of me that explains me. I'll tell you what I know. I kept you where they couldn't judge you and told myself that was shelter. It was storage. A man stores what he's afraid to be seen valuing, and I was afraid. And the fear was older than you, and I let it wear your name. My father saw it from a hospital bed with half his heart working. Everyone saw it before I did. The paper is done. All of it. The record, the announcement, the filing. I know paper isn't the debt. It's just where I had to start, because paper is where I hid. Meredith brought me my grandmother's ring the morning of the funeral. It's in this envelope. I'm not asking you to wear it, and I have no right to ask you anything. But that ring waited 60 years in that house for a woman who couldn't be bought or frightened, and it never once found her until you stood on the lawn. Keep it or sell it or set it on a sill where the light can get at it. It belongs east of Troost. It always did. I'm at the frame shop rooms. Tandy raised the rent on me, which I consider fair. I'm not waiting for you, that's the wrong word. I'm becoming, as slowly as it apparently has to go, a man it would be reasonable for you to come back to. If you never do, then that man is still the only thing I want to have made with the rest of my life. You told my father he doesn't get to pay his debt with your husband. Neither do I. So I won't offer you the man who signed. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, come see the one who filed. L. The sapphire slid out into her palm, pale as first light, the band worn thin by 60 years of another stubborn woman's dishwater. Aletha sat with it a long time at Ceola's kitchen table. Then she set it on the windowsill over the sink, where the morning came in sideways, and she did not call him, and she did not write back. And each day that spring, washing cups, she watched the small blue stone hold whatever the sky was doing, and found she could not yet say what she was waiting for, only that she was no longer waiting for paper. The Jordan River window was finished the Thursday before Palm Sunday. She set the final pane herself, seated the last dove into its lead, and down, in the bottom corner, in glass the size of a postage stamp, cut her initials the way artisans had signed that window in 1921. A.S. And beneath them, because the church ledger required the artisan's full legal name, she wrote it out in her own steady hand for the dedication program and looked at it a long moment on the page. Aletha Sturgis Vandermeer. Still true. That had never been the part in question. The dedication was set for the first Sunday in May, the whole East Side invited, the Star sending a photographer, 27 years of plywood coming down for good. The deacons gave her a stack of invitations for her own people, thick cream cards, the finest thing the Fish Fry Fund ever printed. She addressed one to Ceola, who would sit in front like the queen she was, one to Tandy, one to Miss Otterline, on principle. And on the last evening of April, alone in the workshop, Aletha sat with one blank envelope for the better part of an hour, and then she wrote a crossroads address on it in her restorer's careful hand and walked it to the box on the corner before the argument in her chest could reach a verdict, and heard it fall into the dark, paper against paper, the last word his to answer. Chapter 10. The dedication. The plywood came down on a Saturday, and the men who took it down were the sons and grandsons of the men who had put it up, which is how the East Side does things when it can. Aletha was not there for that part. Deacon Pemble had forbidden it. "You'll see it Sunday with the rest of us," he said, "lit the way the Germans meant it, or you'll see it never." And he stationed Miss Otterline at the side door with instructions. And Miss Otterline had held that door against larger threats than one glass artisan. So on the first Sunday in May, Aletha Sturgis Vandermeer walked into Greater Vine Street Baptist with the congregation like anybody, in her yellow dress, with her grandmother's hand in the crook of her arm, and did not look up until Ceola, halfway down the aisle, stopped walking and said, quietly, "Oh." The Jordan River ran with morning, 11 feet of it, the water gone green gold and alive, the doves climbing through light that had not touched a human face in 27 years, and the whole south wall of the church stood dressed in color, laying blues and ambers down across the pews, across hats and shoulders and upturned faces, the way it had been laid across other faces in 1921, and other faces before Aletha was born, and would lie across faces after everyone in the room was gone. That is the covenant of church glass. It outlasts every grief that walks under it. The East Side filled every pew and stood along the walls. The choir had built something special. The star photographer knelt in the side aisle, shooting up into the light. And in the bottom corner of all that risen river, small as a postage stamp, 2 letters held the morning. A.S. Ceola sat in front, like the queen she was, and cried without apology into a handkerchief older than the deacon board. Aletha had known the window was good. She had not known what it would do to her to watch her neighborhood receive it. Women she'd known her whole life touched her sleeve on their way past. Deacon Pemble, presenting her to the congregation, got 2 sentences in and had to stop and hold the pulpit for a moment, and the church hummed him through it, the low, loving sound that place made when words gave out. And Aletha stood in the crossfire of her own colored light and understood that this exactly was what a life adding up came to, not the trade bulletins. This. Lowell sat in the last pew on the aisle. She had known he would be there. He had answered her invitation the way he answered everything now, with presence instead of language. He had been in that last pew every Sunday since March, before any invitation, a fact she had known for weeks, because the East Side reports all things to its women. He came at 10, sat at the back, put money in the plate, sang badly, shook the hands offered to him, and left, without ever once approaching her, week upon week, a man serving out a sentence no court had given him in the only congregation in Kansas City where his last name brought nothing at all. And in the vestibule before the service, Aletha had seen the other thing, the one she had not known. Lenore Vandermeer, in grey silk, standing uncertainly at the edge of the crowd with an invitation in her gloved hand. Lowell's doing that card. It could have been no one else's. The old woman looked smaller east of Troost, recalibrated by a room that owed her nothing, and when Aletha came near her, she did not perform anything at all. "I came to see the window," Lenore said. "I'm told it's yours." "It's theirs," Aletha said, nodding at the filling pews. "I just put it back." Lenore looked at her then, in full, the second time in their acquaintance, and this time the recognition held. Whatever the announcement in the Star had detonated across her world, whatever the months had done, she had read the arithmetic, all of it, and she stood holding her invitation like a passport to a country with no use for her currency. "I was 19, she said, without preamble, in 1981. My people had cattle debt and the Vandermeers had a son, and I was informed of my engagement at a garden party in front of guests with a ring already sized." Her chin was perfectly level. "Nobody asked me either, Miss Sturgis. I made a life out of never letting that be visible. You made one out of never letting it happen. I don't expect the difference to buy me anything here. I only wanted once to say it in the presence of somebody who won." It was not an apology. Aletha understood that it was the ore an apology would someday have to be smelted from, if the woman lived long enough, and that this was as far as 64 years of iron could bend in one morning. "The service is an hour and a half," Aletha said. "There's a fan under every pew and the choir will change your life. You're welcome to stay, Mrs. Vandermeer. In this house that word means what it says." She left her mother-in-law standing in the doorway of Greater Vine Street Baptist, holding her invitation, deciding. And when the processional began, Aletha saw from her seat of honor that the grey silk had settled, stiffly, unmistakably, into the third pew from the back. An arm's length of scripture, away from her disinherited son, the two of them not speaking, not touching, sharing a hymnal's worth of air for the first time since a funeral, and the light off the Jordan River fell on both of them without checking either name. The choir did what the choir did. The reverend preached restoration, the windows and otherwise, and had the mercy not to look at anyone in particular while he did it. The plates went round. The doves held their climb. And near the end, during the last hymn, Aletha Sturgis Vandermeer stood in the coloured light with her grandmother's hand in hers and let herself, finally, do the accounting she had been refusing all spring. A man who hid her and a man who filed. A signature in a weak hour and a renunciation in the public record. A key that went home to its ring, and a rent-paying tenant in the last pew of her childhood church, 14 Sundays running, asking nothing. Her grandmother's voice, months back, on a ruined evening. Marriage is a house, live in every room. She had lived in the bright rooms with him. Then he had shown her the locked one, and it was full of his fear, and he had spent a winter hauling that fear into daylight, one paper at a time, in front of the whole city, at the price of everything he had been born to. People do not finish becoming. She knew that better than anyone in the building. You do not restore a window by pretending it never broke. You find every fracture, you name it, you lead it, and the lead lines stay visible forever. And that is not the window's shame. That is how anyone can tell, from 50 feet and 100 years away, that somebody thought the light was worth it. The hymn ended. The congregation breathed. Aletha kissed her grandmother's cheek, stepped out of the pew of honor, and walked back up the aisle of Greater Vine Street Baptist against the light, through every color she had rebuilt with her own hands, to the last pew where her husband stood holding his hymnal like a man awaiting a verdict he had promised himself not to appeal. She held out her hand, palm up, open, an offering or a surrender or both. "Come sit with the family," she said. His face broke and mended in the same second, lead lines and all. He took her hand in front of the whole east side, and if the congregation hummed, low and knowing and glad, nobody in that church would ever confess to starting it. Outside, it was May in Kansas City. Inside, the river ran. The light came sideways, the way it always had. It crossed every line in the city to get to them. It did not ask anyone's permission, and it never once, in all its history, checked a name.